Plan for America podcast is a show dedicated to national unity through prosperity that's achieved by free market capitalism. We believe that a rising tide does lift all boats. This show will be positive, solution-oriented, and nonpartisan. Our only agenda is for the prosperity of our country and her people. All are welcome here. This show will not be argumentative or incendiary, sensational, or polarizing and divisive. What we are presenting is a positive solution to one of America's greatest problems. Hello and welcome to Plan for America podcast, coming to you from Dynamic Reality Technologies on the campus of Coastal Alabama Community College in Fairhope, Alabama. I'm your host, Eric Nager, and our special guest today is Dr. Vance Ginn, PhD in economics from Round Rock, Texas. Welcome to the show, Vance.
Thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, we're thrilled to have you here today. A noted economist such as you, you're the president of Ginn Economic Consulting, which is a new venture. You just started out on that, and you have an interesting background. So please introduce yourself to our audience. Tell us your educational and career background to this point, please.
All right, Eric. It's been quite a journey through a number of different things, and growing up in Houston, Texas, and I had the opportunity to go to a private school, then a public school, then even homeschool. So I had an interesting background there. I was a drummer for a rock band for a while, and then I had a car accident in 2002. They kind of changed my trajectory to where I decided, my calling, I feel like God's calling my life, was to let people prosper. And so I went from being a first generation college student, studying economics. It's kind of one of the tools that I'm using to let people prosper. Went to school at Texas Tech University, got a double major in economics and accounting, then went on to get my PhD in economics from Texas Tech out in Lubbock, Texas. And so went from there and taught at Sam Houston State University for a couple of years, a lot of principles of micro and macro and intermediate macro, just a lot of economic courses, and enjoyed teaching, but the academic life wasn't necessarily for me with the publish or perish. And, part of that let people prosper is not necessarily down the road where maybe some people will read my work. I wanted to do that more now. And that got me more in the public policy realm of working at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, which is a 501c3 think tank in Austin, Texas. Started there in 2013, worked there for a number of years on the state budget in Texas, but then also started working on other state budgets in other states, a lot of local policy, tax reforms, there's a lot of fiscal policy overall. And then in 2019, I had the opportunity to go to work at the White House and the Trump administration. I was the chief economist or the associate director for economic policy in the Office of Management and Budget. So right next door in the Eisenhower Executive Office building to the White House, and had a great experience there. Learned a lot, was there to help write the president's last budget, which found $4.6 trillion in savings over a decade, and worked a lot of the economic assumptions. Part of my job as chief economist at OMB was to be on what's called Troika, which Troika comes up with all the economic assumptions that go in the president's budget. So it's the chief economists of OMB and their staff, the chief economists from the Council of Economic Advisors and their staff, and the chief economists from the Treasury and their advisors, all meet together for a number of months to come up with the assumptions that are going to happen over the next decade, meaning basically economic projections for GDP and inflation, interest rates, and how that's going to influence different parts of the budget. And so that was an interesting experience. Learned a lot about the federal budget during that process. And then COVID hit in 2020. And so then I found myself in the Situation Room. As someone who was in homeschool, first generation college student, I didn't think that would be possible, especially this early in life in that sense. But I was there and helping to advise on what was going on at that time. But then around that time is also whenever I decided to move back to Texas in May of 2020 and become the chief economist of the Texas Public Policy Foundation. So moved back there and worked on a lot of issues and started working more on the federal budget, really trying to provide fiscal rules of spending limits and limitations, so that way we can get this budget in back to balanced at some point, because it's running amok with fiscal insanity that's going on and out of DC, and worked a lot of different areas there. And then just recently, about a month ago, I went on my new venture here with Ginn Economic Consulting, where I'll be doing a lot of independent contracting, mostly with state think tanks, but also some of the national think tanks, to help out with different policy initiatives, whether it be fiscal related or occupational licensing sort of things, the labor market, things that are going to remove the barriers of government so that people have more opportunities to meet their own unique needs, and achieve their American dream. And ultimately, kind of summing all up, is to let people prosper. I mean, that's really what I try to work on and do. And so that's another reason why I was excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, well, it seems like there's a lot of dovetail there between what you're trying to do and what we're trying to do with Plan for America. That's why I think you're going to be a great guest today. And so starting with Texas Tech, you may know Alexander William Salter, who's also been a guest on this podcast, another noted economist out of Texas Tech. So I guess they really produce him there.
Yes. Yeah, I'm actually going to have him on my podcast, Let People Prosper show. We just recorded it, and he's going to be on it on coming up soon, I think on Tuesday.
Perfect. So, well, you got a good guest there. We
yes.
know that. So, and what really strikes me about your credentials, Vance, that you have the state and the federal perspective, which not a lot of people have. I think both. One or the other, I think, is common, but not so much both. And that's really what we're trying to do. Plan for America envisions a contract among the state governments, the federal government, and this private trust. We'll get into that in the second half of the show, but your perspective is really interesting in that regard. So Texas Public Policy, you had 2 tours there. What were some of the initiatives you were really working on in your most recent time there?
So the big one was what's called the Conservative Texas Budget, which is really trying to rein in the growth rate. It's a fiscal rule based on a spending limit, limiting the growth rate of the budget to population growth plus inflation, which is a good measure of the average taxpayer's ability to pay for government spending as a maximum. I would love to see the budget, shrink, starting too large in Texas and in many states. But at least if there's some sort of guardrails that can be put on politicians and their decision-making process, and allow for the public to really have a more tangible way to understand what's going on with the budget process, you can start to see some changes. And that we have seen some substantial changes in Texas on budgeting and limiting the growth rate below population and inflation. And that's helped to lower taxes and keep taxes lower than they otherwise would be. And so that's been a big one. There's also been one on property tax reform that I've been working on for a number of years in Texas. That's a big a burden for a lot of Texans. We don't have we're blessed to not have a personal income tax. I think we should never have that. We actually have a constitutional amendment that bans a personal income tax in Texas. I'd love to see the federal government not have one either. We should move more towards a consumption tax system.
But tax at all. How about that?
Well, you got to fund some form of government. I think
we got the plan for that too. But
yeah. But so I'd like to see something along those lines. But I've also been working on what's called our Alliance for Opportunity. It's a 3-state project with the Texas Public Policy Foundation, the Pelican Institute in Louisiana, and the Georgia Center for Opportunity in Georgia on poverty relief initiative to help reduce poverty by 1 million people, or have 1 million fewer people in poverty within these 3 states over the next decade. And really by, reforming a lot of the safety nets that are out there, streamlining them, making sure, and I'm talking more about the state versions, right? That are like TANF, temporary assistance for needy families, SNAP, the food stamps program, housing vouchers, those types, not necessarily Social Security and Medicare, at least at this time. And we're going to talk about that some here today. But having that being a part of it, to where more money, if we're going to have these programs, making sure that the money is actually going to the people that are intended, and fulfill the goals of these programs instead of it going to other programs or to bureaucracy and waste, fraud, and abuse. I think there's a much better system that should be out there. But you also have, improving workforce development. We don't still need 4-year pathway to college, there's also got to be career and technical education and other opportunities for people to really move up the economic ladder. And the last one is removing government barriers like occupational licensing reform, regulatory sandboxes to where you allow for more flexibility of what the regulations are in the system, if we're going to have them, which I would argue a lot of them are are already too burdensome. But that's been another big thing. And so between spending restraint, tax reform, and poverty relief, those are the big three items that I've been working on and we'll continue to work on.
Well, those are big ones, and that's great. You're getting some cooperation with other states too, and there's some initiatives along those lines. I was not familiar with those, and I think that might be interesting news to our viewers and listeners as well. Let's talk about your time at OMB. That must have been interesting as well from a federal perspective, and so much of the budget's already spoken for in terms of entitlement. What were some of the most eye-opening revelations to you when you worked at OMB?
Well, one of the things is that OMB has a lot more budget authority than what I had imagined. There are because really Congress is going to pass the bill for the budget or any sort of appropriations, but it's got to go through OMB to then go out to the agencies throughout the federal government. And I didn't realize that was the flow of how things go. So whenever we would sit down throughout the budget making process from the president's budget, which has to be released the first Monday of every February by law, although the Biden administration did not do that this year, but typically they're supposed to. But whenever you're looking at those numbers, what we would do is we would bring in folks from each one of those agencies to make their case for why they were wanting to spend those dollars. It was very much more of a zero-based budgeting, program-based budgeting sort of approach that is a better methodology for running a budget compared to just saying, okay, here's the base what we did last time, and let's just grow it from there based on inertia. I don't believe that that's what every budget director would do, but that is what Russ Vought did. And what we did as a team was to make sure that we were scrutinizing every one of those dollars that we could, because ultimately, right, it's not the government's money. The government doesn't have money. It's all taxpayer money. And so that money must be spent wisely. If it's going to be spent at all, I'd love to see more of it stay in the private sector. But that's something that we definitely wanted to look at. But it was Eric, it was really eye-opening to see the attention to detail that happened throughout that process as we were formulating the president's budget, which then is sent to Congress as kind of a starting point for what their budget negotiations and discussions will be. Not that they always listen. I think sometimes it becomes just thrown in the trash or used as a doorstop or something else. But I think for those who are really interested in doing something with the budget and knowing the vision for what the president has moving forward, it is a key point and a key thing to look at whenever you have something out there as a publication.
Yeah. Well, as a taxpayer myself, I'm glad to know you were looking at that very carefully and scrutinizing that.
And it doesn't say that. I mean, look, under the Trump administration, there were still too high of deficits. I mean, but ultimately, right, Congress has the power of the purse. Even though we were able to find $4.6 trillion in savings, it was Congress that kept on spending. Of course, I would have loved to see us do even more and cut the budget even more. But it is something that we've got to do something about soon, because this is an insolvency issue that will continue to worsen if we don't do something now.
Absolutely, and that's what's prompting us to act. But before we get to the second half of the show, Vance, I want to ask you with regard to Ginn Economic Consulting. First of all, if someone wanted to get in touch with you, website, what's the best way to reach you, and what types of things are you really looking to help clients with?
Yeah, thank you. So my website is vanceginn.com. So you can find all my information and research and other ways to connect with me there. You can also reach out to me at my website or my email address, vanceginn@gmail.com. Simple email there would also suffice. But I'm really looking forward to doing some economic research and policy making on and taking deep dives into issues and providing insights that hopefully will be helpful in the process to formulating, free market approach to public policy. Too often we have where government's the solution, and my assumption usually is the government's the problem. And so if you come up with a government solution, you're oftentimes going to make the situation worse, not better. And so I'm always looking at ways that is making sure that we are looking at this from the right lens of the economic assumptions that go into whatever the modeling is. I think that's really what the tool is. One of the key tools that you learn from economics is the assumptions that go into it. I mean, economics being the study of human action and interaction within institutions to satisfy our desires given scarce resources. There are a lot of different assumptions that economists make, and oftentimes they're flawed. I would notice that quite a bit, even with some of the modeling that was happening within the Council of Economic Advisors. They were assuming that there's a trade-off between the inflation rate and unemployment rate, what we've called the Phillips curve, which has been long debunked by Milton Friedman and others. And so if you have that in your model, your results are also going to be biased in that process. And so it's really important to see what exactly those assumptions are and what's driving those results at the end of the day, because that's all going to be influential at the end of the day for what those policy recommendations are.
All right, that's great. I know you're going to help people and institutions, organizations all across the country now, not just in Texas. So
right,
I know you'll be very successful. We're going to
Thank
take a quick break here. We'll be right back with Plan for America podcast. If you like what you're hearing and want to learn more about Plan for America, visit our website at www.planforamerica.us. There's an extensive Q&A section there, and if you don't see a question you have, then please ask us by email. You can order our book, Plan for America, How to Place the American Dream on a Sure Foundation Forever. That can be found on Amazon.com. You can like us on Facebook. And if you really like what you're hearing, you're welcome to contribute through our website. Plan for America is a nonprofit 501c3 organization, and all contributions are tax deductible. Welcome back to Plan for America podcast. I'm your host, Eric Nager. We're visiting today with Vance Ginn, PhD in economics and president and founder of Ginn Economic Consulting in Round Rock, Texas. That's right near Austin, the state capital. Beautiful place. I've visited there for the first time recently and had a great time. Vance, thanks for being on the show. Again, we covered your experience working in the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, previously. And so now in this section of the show, we want to talk about Plan for America. Your initial reaction to the plan, because you talked about, well, maybe I should back up and ask, from your perspective, what happens if we do not solve the budget crisis, the debt crisis, the entitlement crisis? What happens if we don't solve that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Eric, and I think that it's something that worries me a lot because it is a massive issue that needs to be addressed. When you just think about the $31 trillion that we have just in national debt, which is about 30% larger than our entire economy and economic output on annual flow of GDP. If you measure it from that way, it's a massive amount of money that we owe. It's amount of about $250,000 owed by every taxpayer. So we're really talking about a massive load. And look, you have a couple of ways that you can pay for that debt. One of the ways is you had to pay for it through higher interest rates. You increase the supply of debt on the marketplace, that pushes down bond prices, and increase in interest rates go up. But at the same time, you have the Federal Reserve, who has targeted interest rates. And so if they want to keep interest rates low, they're going to put more money into the economy. They buy a lot of the trade securities in the secondary market. They pump money into the system. And when they pump money into the system, that's what creates the inflation that we see today, where it's running hotter than 8%, the highest in more than 40 years. It's a direct result of the excessive spending by Congress that's then leading to the fuel of the fire that's giving it to what the Federal Reserve has been doing. So if we continue to spend at this pace and run up massive deficits, which even this year is expected to be another $1 trillion deficit, it's going to be unsustainable. And the more and more that you do that, and the higher and higher the interest rates go, as the Federal Reserve has been targeting higher and higher interest rates, we are seeing interest rates go up across the board with a lot of the different maturities that are out there, 2-year, 10-year, and different types of treasury securities. that means that the cost of interest just on the debt, of funding the debt, will go up. Last year, it was around $350 billion. This year, it's going to be about $550 billion, and will continue to go up as interest rates go up, which means it crowds out more and more of the overall budget, and more taxes will have to go in. Then you add in the unfunded liabilities of Social Security and Medicare, where you think about the long-term payments that are going out versus the amounts that are expected to come in on the net present value, and you're talking about something north of $100 trillion, not $30 trillion,
Oh yeah,
but maybe
easily. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So with your background in OMB, what is your, I guess, initial reaction, thoughts, implications of Plan for America that takes those programs off the government budget, which is roughly around 70% of federal spending today? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, my initial thoughts, Eric, is that, I mean, I think that we need to go something along these lines in this direction, because it needs to be privatized. The government does not do a good job of handling these types of programs, as we've seen. And if we don't do something, they will be insolvent. There will be less money paid out from Social Security over time. And that's coming up here pretty soon. Medicare is also going to have some major solvency issues, which just means that, can we actually pay for it, right? What the costs are going to be for the future with current tax rates and everything, and spending that's coming in. Can we really fund it? And I don't think we can. So we do need some major reforms. And I think that the Plan for America provides some good ideas that are out there that should be a big part of the discussion.
What aspects in particular strike you about the plan? I mean, I'm so close to it. It seems I deal with it more often, but I mean, from someone looking at it for the first time, what really strikes you about the plan as something that could be interesting, helpful, unique, something like that?
I think the big one to me is allowing for there to be a more, without a use of a better term right now, but privatizing Social Security, privatizing a situation that allows for people to have more ownership, more control over their future, compared to putting in money into the Social Security Trust Fund today. That's basically invested or saved, put into very low interest bearing bonds for safety over time. And then once you get out into it later, or you retire, that those funds may not be there for you. And that those monies are currently, it's a pay-as-you-go system. In many ways, it's like a Ponzi scheme. It's rolling over debt that you have going in. And so if your amount of money is not into this account, you don't have an actual account in there today, it's paying for current retirees, is the way the system works. It makes it to where there is less certainty, less control over your future. And so one of the things I liked about the Plan for America is that there is a pathway, at least, to get those who want it, who want to opt in to having more control over their future, which I believe a lot of people will and should, that they can be funded, while at the same time accounting for the cost of those who are current retirees. I think that's going to be a big part of it. I think that there are some good insights as well about the insurance system and having health coverage. I'm a little bit skeptical of whether or not people need health coverage. Because maybe we should be paying out of pocket. Maybe there should be other ways of doing it. But at least there is a path compared to the Medicare system today, which is a large government program, and it gives people, again, more agency, more control over what they want to do in the system. So maybe there's even a way to, instead of having people buy into health insurance, that they have more cash to pay out of pocket for direct care that they're able to get. That may be something else to look at.
No, you bring a great point, because I don't think this particular aspect of Plan for America has yet been covered with any of our guests so far on Plan for America podcast. So again, you did bring up the point. It's an opt-in system, just as a refresher for our listeners too, and viewers. So if you opt into the system, the 15.3% you're paying today in payroll taxes is diverted into a private account in your name, and that's invested in an all U.S. domiciled publicly traded company index. So it'll be virtually costless. Plan for America Trust takes 2% of the assets in the trust every year to pay off current retirees, and that will ultimately retire the unfunded liabilities. And then in years in the future, it will be the sole source of government funding, replacing taxation of any kind, like you talked about before.
Hmm.
It also comes with a comprehensive health care policy for every U.S. citizen. Now, your point about paying the premium, you can opt out if you have, you can put up $100,000 in an escrow account,
Hmm.
and then you wouldn't have to have the coverage, the health care coverage. So that's because one key principle of Plan for America is no one pays for anyone else's health care. So someone with an escrow account who had a health crisis and then needed to tap dollars would have a first line of defense to keep it from falling on the taxpayer or the public in general. So we do have a provision like that if someone did not want the health care coverage. So
Yeah,
that's a great point. So thank you for bringing that up.
yeah, no, that's good. That's a good clarification there. I think I'd overlooked that part, but that's good. I mean, I think that's another good aspect of the Plan for America. And I wonder, Eric, about what you're hearing about the next steps of getting something like this done. Because I mean, I like the direction. But oftentimes Congress is unwilling to make kind of these big reforms that are really needed until there's a crisis. And that may be on it soon, but they may not be.
Well, no, it's a great point. We've been to Washington. We've talked to a lot of people. So I think what we're trying to do with this podcast, with our book, with other things, is try to get the word out at a kind of a grassroots level and create demand for it, because the goodies we feel are better than the current system. And all the other plans we've seen kind of just tweak the current system. We're talking about means testing, raising the retirement age, or Band-Aids that don't ultimately solve the problem. So if we can create demand for this, then we think that's the way to go. Then the politicians would have to follow. I do want to ask you, from your unique state perspective as well, most states have a balanced budget amendment, that most states have to have balanced budgets, but Medicaid and things like that are big drags on that, or big barriers, I guess, to reaching that. From a state perspective, what about Plan for America? How would that help a state like Texas?
Yeah, I mean, in Texas, federal funding is about 1/3 of the overall budget, where federal funding would come mostly from Medicaid. So you're talking about a large portion there. And you do have about 60% of Medicaid's funded by the federal government, meaning taxpayers across the nation, and then 40% are funded by state taxpayer dollars, so funded directly from Texans. And so you do have a portion of that. That would mean a big lift off of state budgets and off of the taxpayer ultimately by moving more towards a system like this, which would not only help for some of the budgetary issues to keep balance over time, to keep within spending limits of, let's say, population growth plus inflation, which is the one that I'm really advocating for and have been for a while, which I would also like to see at the federal level. I think that something along these lines of the Plan for America would better help states and the federal government stay within, some good normal spending that's not overly burdensome on people. And so I think it would help states at the end of the day. I think that we would just want to see exactly what the situation would look like overall. I know you've done a lot of work on this, Eric. So, I mean, it's still a little bit tough for me to see all the fundamentals of how this would work in practice and through this trust. But I think it's something that definitely needs to be looked at more and continue to be researched and spread across through the grassroots so we can get some good momentum.
That's what we're trying to do. And just to clarify one point also on the 2%, the funding mechanism, which the promises have to be kept to the current retirees. There's no way around that. But once those promises are made or those promises are kept, then it's a question of the 2%, I say, goes to fund government, 50% to the federal government, 50% to the states based upon their contribution to GDP. So the states that have the most business-friendly policies in place will reap more of the revenue. So states will be competing with each other to attract business, to attract jobs, to attract industry and all that. So we like that aspect of it as well. Any other comments here, Vance, before we wrap it up? I know it's a big topic here. There's a lot to it.
Well, no, and Eric, I just want to appreciate all the work that you've doing on this, and others who you've been working with. I think it's something that needs to be a part of the mix, because some major changes are needed for, like we said earlier, the solvency of the budget, but also for taxpayers and for our economy and for people to be able to prosper as much as possible without overly burdening them. We're going to have to rein in these massive programs and hopefully reform them, that moving more towards a system that gives them, like we said earlier, more control over their future. Unfortunately, the situation today is that it makes us more dependent on government and their changes to these systems over time. Whereas if we were able to give accounts, give access to people to healthcare and things of that nature, that allows them to do what's in their best interest and for their future and for their families, I think we'll be in a much better situation over the long term and even today.
That's our hope anyway. And I really appreciate you being our guest today, Vance, on Plan for America podcast. And I invite our viewers and listeners to join us next time for the next episode. If you like what you're hearing and want to learn more about Plan for America, visit our website at www.planforamerica.us. There's an extensive Q&A section there. And if you don't see a question you have, then please ask us by email. You can order our book, Plan for America, How to Place the American Dream on a Sure Foundation Forever. That can be found on Amazon.com. You can like us on Facebook. And if you really like what you're hearing, you're welcome to contribute through our website. Plan for America is a nonprofit 501c3 organization, and all contributions are tax deductible.